Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Data Analytics Chat, where we'll discuss the latest challenges and trends in the data science and AI worlds. Today, got an exciting topic, and usually used within the software development space, but now it's becoming more popular in the data domain. So today we're going to discuss the topic of how agile development lifecycle can be helped in data. I'm delighted to welcome Anjo Di Avanzo, who is the Vice President of Data Analytics at the financial services company Citi. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
It's great to have you on the show podcast. And do you want to quickly just give the audience a brief background to yourself, introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My introduction to the data world is probably a little bit different than others. I, in undergrad, studied actuarial science, which is a pretty niche subject area. You study that to go and become an actuary. It turned out I didn't want to become an actuary after college. I knew I had to go back in some capacity to expand my career options. I went and got my master's degree from Villanova in analytics, and that was where my true sort of calling for data came from. And so since then, since I graduated from that program, I've been involved in a couple of different roles at varying types of
Mhm.
companies, all related to data. So I was a consultant for a small consulting firm where I was like the data specialist on my consulting project teams. After that, I was on the data engineering team at Gartner, so working on data engineering projects as well as some front end analytics projects. And now over at Citi, handling more of business intelligence development projects as well as some key automation stuff. I've had some various roles. I'm by no means an expert in anything, I would say, but I've had some different roles in the data space and hopefully some valuable insights that people can grab from.
Yeah. So did you fall into data then? Obviously, you did
A little
study.
bit, a little bit.
It's always interesting to see how people get into it because some, obviously, it's just like they just get into the actual domain and then it just ties in with data. So is that sort of the case or?
Yeah, I think so. And the funny thing about like the data world is you can be in as far into it or out of it as you want to be, right? There are people
Yeah.
whose entire careers revolve strictly around data, working with data. But some of the principles of data and proper data analytics and proper procedures regarding data can be used just about anywhere, right? Everyone wants to focus on these super trendy topics like Gen AI and everything. And they are very cool. Like from seeing some of the stuff that Gen AI can do, it is very cool. But I think some people neglect even just the basics when it comes to data, real, just good, proper engineering practices, ensuring that your data quality is good. You have accurate and complete data. These are things that everyone can attest to, regardless of what your career may be. Those are important across all areas.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think obviously there's been a lot happening in the world the last couple of years. There's been a pandemic, and obviously there's a massive drive on remote working now, isn't there? There's more flexibility, should we say? I guess agile has become more. Businesses have had to adapt a lot quicker than maybe it would have rolled out if the pandemic didn't happen. Would you say that, or?
Yeah, I think so. You can you can look at it and you can see the companies that really pivoted quickly to some new processes, some new procedures once the world of remote work came around. And some companies were more prepared than others. And unfortunately, that's just the way the world works. But you're
Mm.
right. It's a good tie into the data world of a risk or an issue comes up and you have to be able to pivot into something new. It's pretty common these days.
Yeah. No. So I've read some interesting facts. So one figure from the McKinsey report said that organizations, the average cost savings after adopting agile methodologies was like 10 to 15% cost savings, which is obviously good. And then also on the State of Agile report, they said that 50% of organizations saw an improvement on the return on investment after transitioning. So I guess you see its popularity now, why it's getting more into the data world because yeah, then projects are not cheap.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I wasn't familiar with those stats, but they seem pretty accurate. I think adopting an agile process can really be helpful, especially for teams that are focused on development. And development doesn't just have to be software development. It could
Mm,
be, we use agile practices within my group at Citi, and most of our work is either automation based or business intelligence based. You can take those principles and apply them to your world and however you may see fit. And it really is just a good framework to be able to deliver a good work product.
yeah, I think it's yeah, obviously I think like you said, I think everyone like you mentioned, everyone's adopted it different. I think it's adopted differently across each business, isn't it? It's not
Hmm.
it's what I think what fits best within your organization because there's going to be it's different bits, isn't there? Bits and pieces. So then I guess that could tie into the first question. Do you want to briefly explain what the agile development lifecycle is and its core principles?
Yeah, sure. Agile development lifecycle is an iterative approach to development, and it's usually associated with software development, like we said. And so the key word here is iterative because what you're doing is you deploy an initial version one of your product, and then you provide continual improvement or enhancements to the product in your subsequent releases. So you could think of agile development as like the life cycle as a continuous like cycle or circle of steps. Those steps are something along the lines of you start with your requirements gathering or ideation of the product, you go through a development cycle, you go through testing, and then you deploy, and then there's a maintenance period. And then once you complete those steps, the cycle starts again. And so that's version one. And then you have a feedback loop, you're collecting feedback, and then you go right back to development, testing, deployment, and all over again. And that's the beauty of it is it's this iterative approach to developing and producing work and products without having to wait for long periods of time between deployments. So you're getting enhancements and improvements in pretty quick turnarounds rather than traditional waterfall sense.
So for innovation, it is brilliant.
Yes.
You got that constant development, haven't you? Really, and
Yes, exactly. And it's that sort of, like you said, it's constant development. It's never this feeling of, oh, it's over. It's how can we improve? How can we make it better? And it's a mindset of continual and iterative development.
probably ties in quite well with the current market, how things are evolving quickly.
Hmm.
But I guess also then obviously, we can probably discuss challenges later. There, it can get to a point where there's too much going on at once.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. There's nothing is without its challenges, right? That's life. But I think Agile does a good, the whole purpose of Agile principles is to mitigate risk. You're deploying frequently, so you're mitigating the risk of changing requirements at the last minute. But you're also ensuring that you're getting out a new product to make sure that you're not behind the ball on anything. I think Agile itself enables a good sense of risk mitigation, but it's also imperative for the people within the process to be looking for proactively identifying risks that could pop up within your project as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. So then, yeah, it's been previously more utilized within the software development domain. So how can agile methodologies now be applied specifically to data projects?
Yeah. So I think data specific projects is typically where agile methodologies shine the most. Everyone associates it with software development for good
Hmm.
reason. But these principles and these methods can be applied to any sort of database project, from like what my team is doing, development of business intelligence products, dashboards, to like data engineering pipelines, automation. These could all benefit from some agile principles. So, what agile does is it ensures that you're providing value to your user base quickly through iterative deployment, while you're enabling a testing and feedback loop. So, you're identifying bugs and future enhancements in real time. And the testing piece is probably what's most important for database projects. Data quality and accuracy are of the utmost importance. I think that these principles are built perfectly for any sort of database project, especially if it's something that's going to be viewed by a user base.
Yeah. And then, would the time frame differ from, say, a software project to a data project?
I think it's that's an interesting question, because I think number one, it depends on sort of your team processes, and number
Hmm.
two, it depends on the complexity of the project. I would imagine more complex projects are going to have deployments, maybe longer time periods between deployments, but it also depends on what your team is used to doing. For within Agile, there's if you've worked on a development team, you've probably worked in a sprint setting. So a sprint is like a specific period of time where you're breaking down your work into clearly defined tasks, and you're trying to complete those tasks within the specified time frame. Usually it's anywhere from 1 week to a month. So like my team, we
Hmm.
run 2 week sprints. And so what you have is you have your list of tasks for those 2 weeks, and you try to get them done. Now, does that mean you're deploying every time at the end of 2 weeks? You could, but you don't have to, right? You could say have a 6 week deployment cycle. And so you run 3 sprints. And at the end of your 3 sprints, you're deploying your updated version. It I think it depends. And that's the beauty of Agile, is flexible, right? If you're
Hmm.
saying, hey, this work is not so complex, within one sprint, we should be able to deploy a new version. Go for it. Great. As long as you're getting through your development properly, you're getting testing and sign off properly, there's no reason why you can't do that. However, if it's a little more complex, you say, okay, we're going to spend the first sprint solely on development. The second sprint, we're going to spend on testing and any sort of feedback errors, bug fixes that we have to do, and then we'll deploy at the end of the second sprint or at the end of the third sprint. So you can customize it to your time frame and dependent on the project that you're working on.
Okay. Well, interesting. And then, so how can this agile approach help data teams better adapt to the, like, obviously rapidly changing requirements?
Yeah, the benefits here is that when you're working in this sprint agile methodology, I just talked about sprints, but you have a clear picture of what you need to
Mm-hmm.
achieve over the course of your sprint. Prioritization of work becomes pretty easy when you break up your work into sprints. So you can take your highest priority items first and put them into your upcoming sprint. Your lower priority items can be put into your subsequent sprint, or relegated to the backlog for whenever your team has some additional capacity. So it makes prioritization of work very easy. And also, if something pops up in the middle of a sprint, you can always pivot and rearrange some of your work items, push things back to further sprints. Obviously, not ideal, but it's the real world things to
Hmm.
happen. Changing requirements is a little bit different. That's a serious risk in all development projects. So that's often associated with something that people like to call scope creep, which is the worst thing you can hear in a project setting. But it's more common than you think. And I've had
Hmm.
multiple projects where stakeholders will ask for new or different requirements than were initially presented. And of course, it always seems to happen on the week you're like scheduled to deploy. And so luckily, the agile development cycle life cycle can handle this. So you just simply tell your stakeholders, that's great. let's batch it up with the rest of the requirements and put it into our second version that we're going to release in a short period of time. So that's the good thing about Agile is, despite the fact that your user base might be just, oh, wait, I've thought of something else. Like, that doesn't mean you stop work and then add in those new features and have to delay your deployment. You still go forward with your deployment and you take those new requests and you put them towards version 2 or version 3 or
Mm.
whatever else you may be doing.
So it just keeps you on track, basically. It gets aligned, and I guess if you're unorganized, it's key.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it allows you to really focus your work
Mhm.
and to not ignore new requests because you're not ignoring them. You're just
Mm.
making sure that they follow the process. And the whole point of the process is to deliver a good product. And so not following that process and taking in those features is a risk. So you just have to make sure that you're communicating clearly with your stakeholders and being transparent with them to make sure that they understand that their requests are not going unanswered. It's just we're going to do it within our process.
Yeah, no, it's good because I think, like I said, I think communication is the biggest challenge in business because, like I said, things do evolve, change. People get sick, ill, things like that happen. It's just, like I said, you get up new requests, new changes.
Hmm.
It's you need to adapt, don't you? So I think it's, yeah, see where it could be really beneficial there. So I guess how would this, how would like Agile approach help data teams? Sorry, how would it promote best collaboration among like data scientists, your engineers, and the stakeholders?
Yeah, sure. Agile provides like an open line of constant communication between both the development team and the stakeholders. And that's through the built in testing phase that's part of the continual feedback loop
Mhm.
of the agile development lifecycle. So this ensures that your main user base feels like they're involved in the development and the improvement of the product. And it also provides transparency into the productivity of the development team. I remember when I was part of the data engineering team, we would often joke around that we were called like the silent workforce or the invisible workforce, I think it was. Um, and the reason was is because nobody asked you what you were doing. No one cared who you were or what you were doing until something went wrong, and then you were very visible. And so it was like, this like the agile development cycle allows the users and the stakeholders to get a little involved in the development process and see how the sausage is made. Take a look under the hood,
Yeah.
because oftentimes they don't understand the effort or the complexity of the items that they're requesting, so that can lead to some unrealistic expectations for the delivery of the product. And you can mitigate this risk by getting your stakeholders more involved in the process and interacting with your development team on a regular basis. The stakeholders then become more comfortable with the cyclical structure of the agile development process. They know that they'll be receiving a new product in a certain period of time. And I think that kind of just gives them more of makes them more at ease, because if you are going into some large project and you're like, okay, this is going to take 6 months to develop, and stakeholders don't get any updates for 6 months, they're probably going to be a little irritated and wondering what's
Yeah.
going on, what's taking so long. But you being able to develop in an iterative way allows you to be like, okay, this is what we've done over the last 2 weeks. This is what we've done in our last sprint. And you can see clearly like the actual work being done by the development team.
Mm.
It helps really with the communication and mutual appreciation between the two groups.
Yeah. And I guess education as well, isn't it? What's actually going on? Because especially with new technologies come about, if it's more of a stakeholder from the business side who don't quite understand the technical like requirement side, it's going to infuse everyone together. So
Yep.
if they understand what's going on, because obviously if you're not fully educated, you're gonna be like, "What's going on?" Like, "Why weren't these delivered yesterday?"
Yep.
Uh,
Yep. That's definitely part of it, and that's why you want to get your primary stakeholders and your user base involved from the beginning. The sooner and more often you can communicate with them and get them involved in the actual like project and development process, the better it's going to be for you in the long run as a development team.
Brilliant. And then, so how can agile methodologies help data teams sort of better manage and prioritize like technical debt or the technical risks involved?
Yeah, so we touched on this a little bit, but the whole point of iterative releases is to mitigate risks. So
Mhm.
we talked about changing requirements, scope creep, all those things. You're releasing multiple times frequently. So you're going to, if there are new requirements coming in, they can be part of your next release. And so really the best thing to do with the testing and feedback is you're collecting feedback and you batch it all up into one big group of requirements and you label that as okay, this is
Mhm.
our set of objectives for version 2. The testing phase also is it ensures that you're meeting the needs of the user, and typically some sort of user stakeholder sign off is required before deploying. That's the whole purpose of the testing loops. And as opposed in a typical waterfall project, you're going through all this planning, all this development work, and you're deploying at the end of the project. And if you have no idea if you accomplished all of the requirements, really, some requirements, some new features, they don't become clear until the user base actually interacts with your product and sees it for the first time. That's what makes the agile process so special is these new requirements can be handled in a pretty quick way. It's okay, thank you for the feedback, thank you for these new
Mm,
requirements. That'll be part of version 2. Whereas in waterfall, you have to spin up a whole new project just to get these little tweaks done. I think it's the process itself is inherently risk mitigating, which is great.
mm. Yeah, I guess demands in data projects is constantly changing, isn't it? It's just could be 1 week and there's something new out. Like
Yep. Yep.
it's like
It's
moves that quick, and then obviously if you've got to go do this whole new loop again, or it's just going to take delay things.
it is. It definitely is. And that's part of the beauty and also scary part of technology, right? Is once
Mm,
you something new comes out and once you feel comfortable and feel like you've learned it, there's a new product, there's a new technology coming out that you have to learn and you have to figure out. So yeah, uh, it's an interesting environment to be in. It's definitely a fun environment to be in, but you really got to be constantly learning and upskilling yourself.
yeah, no, definitely. I think it's a journey in it, really. You can't. It's because you, obviously you can deliver your deliverables, but there's a new thing you got to deliver.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
constantly going, and that's obviously you got to keep learning, haven't you? Like, you got to have that growth mindset
yeah.
because you got to, like I said, we've seen like with the Gen AI boom, that's just changed massively, isn't it? Like the
It
dynamics of
has.
things.
Yeah, it has, and you're right. And I think the people that I've come across that I find to be the best developers, the best people that work within technology are ones that are constantly wanting to learn. They're like curious individuals. They say, "What's this new thing? How can we apply it? Is there a way that it can benefit our group, our team, our company?" And they start experimenting, and that's the beauty of technology and I guess really science. That's how science kind of came
Mm,
up and about. Whereas, but that sort of curious mindset is really what drives technology and innovation forward. And those are some of the most fun people to work with.
yeah, because I think things just keep changing. Like, I think we've done podcasts before on like the evolution of DBA to data engineering, and even like
Mhm.
now, that's moving into more software fields. Like it's constantly, if you've not got that mindset that, or you got that not got the ability to want to learn new things, you're
Mhm.
just you're gonna just lose out, aren't you? Really, like you just
Yeah.
obviously there's still gonna be some projects where you can stay with legacy applications, but again, I
Yeah,
think it's good to keep
it's
learning,
a
right? I
real
think
problem.
yeah,
It's a real problem if you think about it because this is how companies become really far behind
mm,
in the technical space is they introduce at the time cutting edge technology, and if you have a large organization, adoption of new technologies is not easy, let alone implementation of technologies is hard enough, but then you need to get your actual associates to start using it and adopt it. That's really difficult to do, and so that's why I think we see a lot of these companies that might be behind the ball in a technical sense with really outdated systems and
mhm,
or just outdated mindsets. You mentioned DBA and data engineering is becoming a thing of the past if you think about it, right? Like everyone used to
mm,
think of the world in terms of relational databases, and then you had things like OLAP cubes coming in, and now there's knowledge graphs, and so
mm,
it's really it's a constantly evolving field. It's a constantly evolving world, and like I said, it's bittersweet because it's cool and you get to learn and you get to be a part of it, but you also have to keep up with it.
yeah. I guess probably the big
Yep.
challenge. You can't have a week off, well, you can, but you get on it. Uh, so we touched on quite a few challenges there, but other challenges would you say are, well, what are the main challenges for adopting Agile for data projects and how can they be mitigated?
Yes, I think the main challenge is just changing the mindset or the culture of your team. There can be some pushback on adopting some of these concepts. I remember when I first started working in an agile sprint methodology, I was like, why am I doing all this extra stuff just to fit into this process? But if you think about it, you're asking your team to be, if you're working in a sprint setting, you're asking your team to be held accountable for accomplishing their tasks in a very specific time frame.
Mhm,
So some associates might not understand why it's necessary at first, but I think the whole goal of the agile sprint process is to ensure productivity while setting realistic expectations for work that can get done in like that specified time frame. So you're trying to find the sweet science between how do I
mhm,
maximize productivity but limit burnout and not make sure that people are working 24/7 for 2 straight
mhm,
weeks. On top of that, if you have a full-blown scrum process with daily stand-ups and sprint retrospective meetings and stuff like that, there could be some pushback at first from people in the beginning. You know, those extra check-in meetings, they might say, I already have so and so meetings per week. Why do I need an extra 3 or 4? I think once you get engulfed into the cycle, you really start to understand the methodology and
mhm,
why it's important to have all of these processes in place because it takes some of the it takes a lot of the ambiguity of work out of it, right? If you think about it this way, you work in a 2-week sprint cycle. You have a set of tasks that you need to complete. You are then having check-in meetings. Almost some people do daily stand-ups. We do 3 a week. We have check-in meetings Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You can provide an update on those items, and if you have a blocker or an issue that you need help with, there's a time specified for you to bring that up. So you're not
mhm,
on an island by yourself, not sure what you should be working on. Like it takes all the ambiguity out of it. You should be working on items A, B, and C. They need to be done by the end of these 2 weeks. And if you have problems, you let the team know in one of the several meetings
mhm,
that we're going to have together over the course of the next 2 weeks. So I think it may be foreign to people at first, and it takes a little bit of time to get people to fully adopt it. But I really do think that these principles, and again, you don't have to adopt a full Scrum process, right? Like you can do the beauty of this is you can take bits and pieces of it and it'll still be beneficial. What we
Mm.
do at my team, we call it like pseudo Scrum. We do stand ups 3 days a week. We have a 2 week sprint process. We break our items down into individual tasks and assign them out to each other and make sure we have a feedback loop and everything. But we're not a full blown Scrum process. So but we're using these agile methodologies in a way that makes sense for my team that helps us improve our productivity and our work product.
Yeah. Guess it's just best that I guess what I like obviously with the hybrid world now is that the companies that have flexibility because I think at the end of the day you want if you work best in the office, go to the office. If you obviously I appreciate you, and then if you've got that hybrid approach, you got the benefits, haven't you, as well? Like meeting people, learning, and I guess same like here, you've got the flexibility of different Scrum bits. You take a bit of
Right.
this, bit of that, or you can go all out. So obviously, whatever's best for your team because human's different. You just can't. It's just the way it is. Some people will work best being organised like this. If they got you got to do this within 2 weeks, that's good. And then I think time frames also do give you that. Oh, I got to do this. Keeps you like motivated, doesn't it? Oh, I've got
Yep.
2 weeks to do this, or 1 week to do this, whatever it is. It keeps you like, on online, like you focus with that deadline.
It definitely does. And you have to think about it. Each team has different responsibilities. Like organizations are different and the teams within
Mm.
those organizations are different. And so a a team that's strictly a software development team, they might benefit from a really strict, really rigorous Scrum
Mhm.
process. But a team that handles a lot of ad hoc requests and has to turn things around really quickly, they might they might benefit better from like a Kanban board or something like that.
Mm.
And and that's why I love just looking at these methodologies as like a toolkit that you can use and leverage as you see fit to make your life easier in the workplace.
Just pick a mix.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like you touched on this, there's different methodologies. So I guess how can agile practices like user stories and acceptance criteria be adapted for data projects then?
Yeah, so I think these things, user stories and acceptance criteria, people might not be familiar with the terms, but they're embedded in everyday projects if you really think about it. So within each project, you have a goal or a set of goals. If this project is user facing, if you're creating something that's interactive, then you need to start by gathering use cases or user stories from your main stakeholders. So these will like later be translated into requirements and tasks for the development teams to complete. And you'll typically hear something like, I want to be able to see our sales volume trending over time. I need to see our sales over time. Like this is helpful. Okay, so we have a general idea of what kind of data we're working with, but it's not the whole picture, and it's not enough detail for development teams to work with. So frequently, the users are not as technically proficient as the development teams. So you're going to have to get as much information from them as possible to ensure that your development teams have really clear, defined tasks to get done. They want to see sales. Okay. Do they want to see sales volume in units? Do they want to see sales volume in dollars? Do they want to see it? Do you want to be able to break it down by the different products that you sell, the different product categories? Do you care about by region, by country? What sort of time frame are you interested in? 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? These are the kinds of details that are really important to ensure that you have a smooth development process. And if you think about it, the user story is basically what the user tells you, the use case. And your acceptance criteria is your way of understanding and mitigating the risk that you build out this big thing and you show it to your users and they say, yeah, but I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. What you have to have is clearly defined requirements and clearly defined acceptance criteria. So it removes the ambiguity from the development team, and it gives the users like their checklist of what they want when they get to see it for the first time and go through the testing, what user acceptance testing or UAT. I would say people might not understand these terms, and that it's very fair for the rest of the agile methodologies. There might be terms that people are not familiar with, but these things are embedded into your everyday work. It's just that we're trying to clearly define them and make sure that these risks are accounted for in the process.
So just it's easier to communicate across the different teams.
Yep,
'Cause-
exactly.
yeah, brilliant. What can you share like real example where agile has significantly improved like a data project's outcome?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my previous company, the main stakeholders, they wanted an interactive dashboard to provide visibility into the results of a new hire training program. And the program itself was relatively new. So they were constantly changing the contents of the program and the data that needed to be collected and the insights that were needed, to truly understand how well these new hires were doing in the program. They were still figuring out the stakeholders were still figuring out, were they asking the right questions on the assessments? Did they need to increase the number of assessments? Did decrease the number of assessments? This project was going to evolve over time. And so this was why it was like a perfect example of how an agile methodology could help and work in a project like this. So we were a relatively small team. We had limited capacity. We couldn't dedicate a group of us to work on this project full time. So what we did was we said we worked with them and devised a plan. We would work 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off. The 6 weeks that we were on, we were dedicated to finalizing the requirements, making sure everything was clear, development work, testing, and then deploying a new version at the end of those 6 weeks. And so you think about it, our release cycle was every 12 weeks, but it was like a
Mhm.
6 week development cycle. Um, and so then after we deployed the initial version, they had 6 weeks to go look at the product, use it, figure out what they liked, what they didn't like, put together some enhancements, figure out if they needed to change their program at all, which happened a few times. And so they had 6 weeks to gather all this feedback and consolidate it and give it to us in the form of new requirements so that when those 6 weeks were up, we could get the ball rolling and start development right away on the next iteration. And so this sort of like continual agile partnership was really beneficial, especially given the fact that it was the constantly evolving nature of their program. They needed to see new data. They wanted to change the way that they could view the data. But they didn't know it yet because they were still building out the program themselves. And
Mhm.
so rather than wait for them to figure everything out, probably would have taken forever, we worked in this iterative partnership with them to where, okay, we deployed this first version, they might have changed some things and come back to us. Now we need to see this new piece of data that we weren't collecting before. That's fine. It'll go into the next release, next 6 weeks.
Mhm.
And so that was the way that we operated with that group. And it turned out to be a really successful project.
Yeah. Obviously, when building up products and things like this, it's going to be times when you can't get it all right, can you? You're not going to be you're not perfect straight away, are you? It's going to be
No.
things like, and it's also pretty opens up opportunities as well, doesn't it? Like, oh, actually, look, we could do some whatever an enhancement here where it's going to dramatically improve the product.
Hmm.
So I guess it helps there, I see, on your journey, it's like where you're going to make the improvements or maybe get rid of something. You never know.
Yeah, in an ideal world, for every single project, you would have clear cut requirements
Mhm.
and you would go through development and you would go through testing and get your sign off and deploy to prod and everyone would cheer hooray. This isn't the real world. This is the real world. Sorry, that's not the real world. This is
Yeah.
things change, people's mindsets change, new ideas come up. There are always going to be enhancements, things that you can improve. And so I think that mindset is good for these. And while you would love for your projects to be really clearly defined, you have to accept the fact that not everything is going to be everything's going to be perfect and built out by the time that development's going to start. And so that's the whole purpose of this iterative process is you know that you're going to release version 1, and while you're going to get feedback, there's a version 2 coming, right? It's not just you're just going to get a bunch of negative feedback from people and they're going to be upset at you and oh, that's the end of it. No, this is good feedback. How can we improve the product? And we'll do that again once with our next release.
Yeah. And I guess I'll say more there's more data now, isn't there? There's more, well, it's keep going, there's more data. As I guess data projects become more complex, there's more teams, stakeholders involved. Is
Mm.
Agile going to be? Is it still going to help, or is it going to be overrun? Is there going to be too much going on?
I think agile development by is supposed to be a collaborative effort. And so by nature, there's always going to be multiple teams and stakeholders involved in every agile development. And I think as we've shown, you can scale, you can use agile development on a project where the complexity is lower than that of
Mm,
software development. I still think you can use it for things that are going to be eventually become more complex than software development.
yeah.
Just because the principles themselves are supposed to help you organize your work and be as productive as possible and follow a good, steady, concrete process that's going to help maximize your productivity and the product that you're putting out. And so I think we touched on transparency a little bit earlier, but it really is imperative that there's transparency between the stakeholders and users and the development team. The developers need to fully understand the needs of the user base, and the user base needs to understand the complexity and capacity of what the development team is working on, especially as these things get more and more complex. But you think about some of the Gen AI stuff that's going on now, you need to make sure you really have your data in a good place before you can feed it into Gen AI. Otherwise, it's and so that might be complex. Building the foundation for that might be extremely complex, and the user base might not be aware of that. And so I think most agile teams will use some sort of software. Jira, we use Jira or similar to track their development items. And I think sharing those Jira items with your stakeholders is a great way to get them involved. It also provides transparency into the work that you're completing because you're closing these Jira items out in real time, and they'll be able to see that okay, these things have been closed out and checked off. That means that we should expect them in the next release cycle. In terms of alignment, so alignment is extremely important for your organization's success. And teams within an organization or a large group, if you think about cities, 300,000 people or something like that, it's going to be pretty hard for everyone to be aligned. But if your big group that you're a part of is aligned, then and following the same similar processes or practices, that's great because everyone's on the same page. So even if you're
Mhm.
not in a development team, you could still apply some sort of agile principles to your working practices. Things like thinking about building things incrementally or applying systematic thinking. There's been a push lately at Citi from our CIO to unify some of our procedures and get back to basics is the term that he's using. Get back to
Mhm.
basics. And if you think about it, that's what agile really preaches, right? Like it's a uniform set of steps that ensure on time, accurate delivery of work products. And if your groups or other groups in your organization can be aligned to this thinking and these practices, it can really help unify your workforce and improve your operations. Yes, things are going to get more complex, but the principles themselves are not going to change. I think maybe they evolve slightly, but I think these principles can scale as complex or as simple as you need them to be, just depending on what your group or your team is
Mhm.
specifically trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think I do like that. Get back to basics because I think obviously it is complex. Tech is complex, but I
Yeah.
guess if you've got this process, do this, you're going to achieve. Then if you've got a million and one things to do, you can spiral out of control. And like, think, where the hell am I going? Like, what
Yeah.
am I doing? Like, this keeps you in the loop. And then also you got that, I guess, that feedback loop. Like, you keep looping in. If things are going wrong or there's challenges, then you can communicate, and then obviously then you move on and then put a solution in place.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you nailed it right on the head is even if it is a complex project, you should still be following the basic steps and doing good development work. Like I
Mm,
said earlier, some people are so obsessed with these fancy, trendy topics, and it's great stuff. But if your data isn't correct, if you have inaccurate or incomplete data, then your predictive analytics and Gen AI machine learning algorithms are going to mean nothing because they're built
yeah.
on bad data. So, getting back to basics really means how do we ensure our data quality is good, ensure we're following a
Mm,
process that enables us to do good engineering work, and making sure that the work is tested and properly signed off by the right people. Like these are all basic ideas. They're not trendy,
yeah.
fancy, flashy ideas. It's oh, testing work. Boy, that's pretty boring. Yeah, it is. But you know what? That's how you ensure that your work product is good. And so I really like the get back to basics logo. I might end up stealing that, but I think it really does speak to some of the things that we talked about here today. And some things that again, the beauty of data, you might not be involved in Gen AI products. That's fine. But someone might ask you for an ad hoc, I need an ad hoc report on this. And you can think about these basic things like, is the data that I'm looking at correct? How can I make sure that I, I get this signed off before I send it out? These are really simple concepts that can be applied at various levels.
Yeah, no, definitely. Cool. Oh, brilliant. On that note, I really appreciate your time today. Share some interesting stuff. So thank you for your time, Andrew.
Oh, thank you, Ben. This was a pleasure. This was my first podcast. I
You've done great.
appreciate you having me on.
You're great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.